The court is now back in session and the floor will be given once again to the prosecution to continue their closing statement. You may now proceed.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Shortly before lunch, we started to address the liability of the accused for these crimes. And this afternoon, I'll concentrate on the issue of how power was organised and how power was exercised in democratic Kampuchea. Because to understand that, to understand how power was exercised by the leadership, then we'll understand how these accused contributed to the crimes. And so this discussion on the organisation of power and the principles by which they exercise power and the authority structure and the reporting system in the way that they controlled power will be the discussion points this afternoon. And then on Monday, we'll talk about the particular roles of the accused and how they contributed to the crimes in the context of how power was exercised in democratic Kampuchea. Your Honours, perhaps if we can look at the early story, the pre-1975 story of Pol Pot, Nguyen Chia and Khieu Samphan, and look at the facts relating to the evidence that proves the close working relationship that those three had between each other. In September 1970, Khieu Samphan, Pol Pot and Nguyen Chia met at the Stung Chinit River on the border of Kampong Thom and Kampong Cham provinces, where the CPK was establishing its new party headquarters. Khieu Samphan admits this himself, both in his interview to the co-investigating judges and the books he wrote prior to his arrest. The Chamber also heard from two witnesses who were present when these three leaders met in 1970. And those witnesses were Pi Pon and Un Tan. Khieu Samphan had spent the prior year or two at Thai Muk's headquarters at Mount Oral. Pol Pot came from his former headquarters in Ratnakiri. Nguyen Chia came from Phnom Penh, where he'd been leading the resistance in most regions of the country for the 7-year period after Pol Pot fled to the Marquis in 1963 and was geographically restricted. This was, of course, not the first time that these three men had met. Nguyen Chia and Pol Pot were introduced by a fellow party member back in 1955. They worked together for the next 5 years, preparing the party's statute and strategic lines, and by 1960, Nguyen Chia and Pol Pot were the top leaders of the movement. Khieu Samphan and Pol Pot had been schoolmates in Kampong Cham in the 1940s. Nguyen Chia testified in this trial that he first met Khieu Samphan somewhere near Mount Oral. As Khieu Samphan was based at Tha Mok's headquarters on Mount Oral from 1969 to 1970, it's likely that he and Nguyen Chia first met there, if not earlier, through the Phnom Penh City Committee of the party. Your Honours, but it was in September 1970 that these three men first began to live and work together at the same location, a relationship that would continue for the next 28 years. At the party's new headquarters, on the Stung Chinit River, which was called S71, Pol Pot, Nuon Chea and Khieu Samphan lived in houses close to one another and worked together on a regular basis. Phi Pon, who worked as a bodyguard for Pol Pot during that time period, described their daily routine of meetings as follows in his testimony at trial. And I quote, question, from 1971 to 1974, did Khieu Samphan and Pol Pot meet frequently? Answer, from 1971 to 1974, they met rather often. There was some time when they were separated because the office where they were located was on different sides. But later on, the offices were moved close to one another. Then Khieu Samphan came to work in the office adjacent to Pol Pot's office. And I also indicated the other day that sometimes they worked together. Among three of them, Uncle Number 1, Uncle Number 2 and Khieu Samphan. But on certain occasions, Pol Pot wrote, prepared notes in his house or location. So on certain occasions, they prepared their documents separately in their respective locations. Question, thank you. So when they met, in your observation, did they often meet in the afternoon or late afternoon? They met in the morning. When they had breakfast, they had gruel together, and then they started meetings from, say, 8:30 to 11. And then during lunchtime, they also met. Then they had a short break, and then the work would resume in the afternoon. And then, following the conclusion of the day's work, they would go back to their respective locations and they had dinner separately. Question, so is it safe to say that they met frequently? Answer, they met subsequently discussed matters, is that correct? Sorry, that was the question. Answer, yes, that's correct. Your Honours, in addition to their daily work routine, Nuon Chea, Khieu Samphan and Pol Pot participated in meetings with other party leaders held at S71 headquarters at least once a year, where key decisions were made on CPK policy and strategy. Matters such as the closing of markets and establishment of cooperatives in the so-called liberated zones, and the party strategy to seize or control the people by emptying out cities and towns that were captured by their forces. Your Honours, I'll return to some of these other meetings in more detail later, but I would now like to discuss one of the first big meetings that was held after Pol Pot, Nuon Chea and Khieu Samphan arrived at Stung Chinit, the Third Party Congress held in July or August 1971. It was at the 1971 Congress that Khieu Samphan admits he was appointed to the party's Central Committee as a candidate or alternate member. Phi Pon was present, working as a guard at that meeting, and he identified 3 photographs that were taken at the Congress. And we will show you 2. In this photograph, Khieu Samphan can be seen in the middle of the back row, a little left to the hammer and sickle, where you see the red circle. Pol Pot is in the middle of the front row, sitting on the ground, and Nuon Chea is the last person standing on the far right of the photograph. The next slide is another photograph from the same location, where we can see a meeting in progress presided over by Pol Pot in the middle, who is standing, and Nuon Chea, who's seated next to Pol Pot. The role models for the revolution, whose pictures hung on the wall of the CPK office, included Lenin, Marx and Stalin. Your Honours, the fact that Khieu Samphan was quickly promoted to and made a member of the CPK Central Committee in 1971 is extremely significant. His fellow ghosts, who fled with him from Phnom Penh in 1967, Hu Yun and Hu Nim, were not appointed to the Central Committee or allowed into the inner circle of the party leadership. While Khieu Samphan rose to the top of the party ranks, Hu Yun and Hu Nim became victims of the party's internal purges. Your Honour, there's only one explanation for the remarkably different fates of these three intellectuals who joined the Marquis in 1967. Khieu Samphan, Hu Nim and Hu Yun all had known reputations with the Cambodian public that made them valuable additions to the movement. All three had worked in the Sihanouk government, knew Sihanouk well, and could have served as the bridge between the Communist Party of Kampuchea and the Prince. But only one of the three agreed wholeheartedly with the plans and policies of the CPK. Khieu Samphan was accepted into the inner circle of the CPK leadership because he agreed with them, because he was willing to work and contribute to their plans and their policies. Hu Yun, on the other hand, openly disagreed with CPK policies, including the plan to evacuate Phnom Penh and other cities. As Your Honours has heard from two witnesses who testified in this trial, Noi Mao and Pi Pun. Hu Nim was also known to be opposed to certain policies of the CPK, as reflected in these annotations by Sun Sen and Doik, found in the Confession of Khoi Tun, which indicates that Khoi Tun followed Hu Nim's stance on the market issue and the evacuation of people, and that everyone knew Hu Nim was opposed to the policy of the party on purging the enemy, and that this stance towards the enemy was peaceful and compromising. Two intellectuals who opposed the party policy to evacuate from the people from the cities, both of whom were ultimately arrested and executed. Khieu Samphan, on the other hand, the one who supported these policies, gained entry to the elite central leadership of the party. It was through his loyalty to the CPK leadership and his agreement with and promotion of their policies that Khieu Samphan became a Central Committee member, a regular attendee at standing committee meetings, and a brothers-in-arms of Pol Pot and Nguyen Chia for 28 years. Khieu Samphan's role and importance in the revolutionary movement grew quickly over time. He soon became the public face and spokesman for the Khmer Rouge, responsible for leading delegations on trips to foreign countries and issuing public statements on behalf of the resistance, the National United Front of Kampuchea and the Royal Government for the National Union of Kampuchea. In the film footage you will see Khieu Samphan, Pol Pot and CPK leaders together in March and early April 1973 on the occasion of Sihanouk's trip to the liberated zone, where he was officially greeted by Khieu Samphan. Your Honours, in the next film footage, you will see Khieu Samphan give a speech in China about Cambodia's great victory in 1975. And this video has sound.
Meeting. Khieu Samphan is received as a great leader. He has now fully assumed the role as the top leader of the Khmer Rouge. Pol Pot acts in the background. This play will go on for 25 years, for as long as the Khmer Rouge exists.
The United Cambodia government has just come from one of the hottest battles of our time. Our victory is the strategy for Cambodia and the Cambodian people.
Mr. President, the evidence introduced at this trial has proven the close working relationship between Pol Pot, Nguyen Chia and Khieu Samphan, and that relationship continued in 1974 and 1975 as the CPK prepared its plans for the final attack on Phnom Penh. During this time, Pol Pot established a number of new forward bases west of Udong and closer to the key battlefields, including the B5 office in Peen Commune. Witnesses Saloth Ban and Phi Pon testified that Khieu Samphan and Nguyen Chia spent time at the B5 office and participated in meetings held at that location with Pol Pot and the zone leaders or military commanders. Phi Pon testified that, and I quote, B5 was the command centre to attack Phnom Penh, to liberate Phnom Penh, unquote. When asked about the meetings at B5, Phi Pon said, and I quote, the regular meetings at B5 were chaired by Pol Pot, who regularly stayed at that location. Sometimes Nguyen Chia, Khieu Samphan also came there. Sometimes the three of them would just convene the meeting on a regular basis. And also they met when people from the zones, including Sun Sen, Ta Mok, Vorn Vet, Cheng An, Khoi Ton, Kay Pok, Sol Pim, and Tai Pong, they would meet every 5 days or a fortnight. It depends on the actual circumstances in the battlefield, unquote. The location shown in some film footage you will be about to see, in which Pol Pot, Nguyen Chia and Khieu Samphan are working together, studying maps, and a radio communication system is being operated, was identified by Phi Pon as the B5 base. Both Khieu Samphan and Nguyen Chia have admitted that they were at the CPK forward bases in the critical time period leading up to and immediately after the capture of Phnom Penh. In his book, Cambodia's Recent History and the Reasons Behind the Decisions I Made, Khieu Samphan wrote, and I quote, by the end of March 1975, I was invited to the general headquarters of the Communist Party of Kampuchea in Phum Dong, west of Udong, to follow the last offensive against the capital more closely. Every day, with a few army officers, I followed the battle's progression on the radio. On April the 17th, at around 9 o'clock, our hearts filled with joy, we had heard the voices of commanders of various units speak from several points inside the capital, unquote. Khieu Samphan also admitted to the investigating judges that he was located at, and I quote, the headquarters of Pol Pot to the west of Udong, unquote, during the time period. His wife, So Sachiat, testified that she joined her husband at the Sadok Tal, Taol, forward base after the fall of Phnom Penh. Nguyen Chia admitted in his trial testimony that he went to B5 for meetings with Pol Pot. The book published by Tet Sumbat, based on interviews and on a manuscript provided to him by Nguyen Chia, states that prior to entering Phnom Penh, Nguyen Chia had been living there for the last few weeks in Piem Commune. And in paragraph 417 of Nguyen Chia's written closing submissions, he admits the following, and I quote from the defence brief. In April 1975, Nguyen Chia was located at B5 in Kampong Chenang province. Cadres present at B5 in that period included Pol Pot, Kay Pork, Sao Pim, Von Vet, Ta Mok and Sun Sen. The subject under discussion at B5 was principally the liberation and subsequent evacuation of Phnom Penh. Unquote. Your Honours, the confirmed presence of Nguyen Chia and Khieu Samphan at B5 and other forward bases in the period leading up to and immediately after the 17th of April 1975 is of central importance to this case. I'll discuss in more detail later a key meeting that took place at B5 in early April 1975, at which both Nguyen Chia and Khieu Samphan approved the final plans for the evacuation of Phnom Penh. But it's equally important to understand the general function of the B5 base in relation to the role of the party centre leaders and their control of the CPK military, which was then known as the Cambodian People's National Liberation Armed Forces. In the written notes he prepared for his testimony at trial, Nguyen Chia wrote that the B5 base in Piem Commune was used, I quote, in order to command for the control of the liberation of Phnom Penh, unquote. In the statement he gave at the start of the trial on the 22nd of November 2011, Nguyen Chia stated that the party's forward bases in Piem Commune were established, I quote, to ensure an effective and ultimate success with the attack to liberate Phnom Penh, unquote. And he also noted that the cadres battling for Phnom Penh made, quote, daily reports, unquote. Your Honours, Salif Ban testified that the reason for the party establishing a mobile base near Odong was, I quote, to facilitate command of the attack of Phnom Penh, unquote. And P. Pon testified that B5 was a command centre to attack Phnom Penh to liberate Phnom Penh, and that the reason for the creation of B5 was that it was established to issue commands for the attack on Phnom Penh. It was a kind of military headquarters because that was the time that the attacks had to be carried out from all spearheads towards Phnom Penh, unquote. Your Honours, every time during these closing arguments that the defence asserts that the evacuation of Phnom Penh was conducted by autonomous zone armies or that the party centre leaders had nothing to do with the military and no control over the troops that attacked and evacuated Phnom Penh, I want you to remember the picture of the B5 command base. The command base for the CPK military, where at the time Phnom Penh was captured and evacuated, all the key party leaders and zone commanders were gathered in order to command the troops carrying out the mission. Pol Pot was there, Nguyen Chia was there, and Khieu Samphan was there. Sun Sen was there. The leaders of each of the zone armies assigned to carry out the evacuation were there. Khoi Ton from the North Zone, Sao Pim from the East Zone, Tai Mak from the Southwest Zone, and Vaughan Vet from the Special Zone. Your Honours, the top party leaders gathered at a military command base less than 30 kilometres from Phnom Penh, whereas Phi Pon has testified, Khieu Samphan has acknowledged, and the last film clip we played shows that the leaders had a radio communication device with sufficient power and range to monitor the situation in all battlefields around Phnom Penh. You have heard the testimony of CPK military commanders and soldiers such as Ung Reng, Mies Vun, Yeng Pan, Cham Se and Sum Chia, all of whom participated in the capture and evacuation of Phnom Penh, stating that their divisions communicated and received orders by radio. Ung Reng testified that messages to and from the brigade commander were relayed by a radio operator attached to the brigade. Cham Se, a mid-level commander in the Special Zone, testified, "I normally received orders from the division commander through radio communication." Mies Fun stated that he relayed information via radio communication up to the division. North Zone soldier Sum Chia testified that everyone came to Phnom Penh all at the same time. They communicated through radio communication. And Southwest Zone Regiment Commander Yang Pan testified that, as for the Liberation Forces, we communicated by radios, and each battalion had a radio operator. And as my colleague has referred, on the 28th of January 2013, this year, Al Rockoff provided the following information about the Khmer Rouge soldiers that he witnessed in Phnom Penh on the 17th of April 1975. He was asked the question, "Did you see any Khmer Rouge soldiers who were communicating by radio?" He answered yes. There evidently was very good radio network going. Some Khmer Rouge had US military radios called the PRC-25. There was a Chinese radio that looked rather similar to it in size. There were Motorola radios which you had were rather bulky, and did not see that many radios, but usually with somebody who obviously was in charge, you would have a radio operator close by." Unquote. You may also recall this picture taken by Roland Naveau on the 17th of April that shows a Khmer Rouge soldier in Phnom Penh with one of those radio devices. You can see in the photograph the handset on which the soldier is talking and the radio box to which it's connected to on the ground. Your Honours, it's been proved beyond any doubt that the CPK troops who attacked and evacuated Phnom Penh beginning on the 17th of April 1975 were commanded by the CPK leaders located at the forward bases near Odong. Pol Pot, Nguyen Chia, Khieu Samphan and the other party leaders who were gathered at the CPK forward bases were aware of and controlled all key activities of those troops. do not be fooled for a second by the lies of the accused that we still see in their final briefs, claiming that the party centre lacked effective control over the CPK military in April 1975. The close working relationship between Pol Pot, Nguyen Chia and Khieu Samphan continued when the leaders moved into Phnom Penh after the 17th of April 1975. The essential facts regarding the movements and activities of the CPK leaders during this period have been testified to by P. Pon and others and confirmed by Khieu Samphan. Less than a week after liberation, the CPK leaders entered Phnom Penh. They stayed first at the railway station, then at the Ministry of Commerce or Finance, and by mid-May 1975, they were based at the Silver Pagoda, the Priya Kev Temple. In his interview to the investigative judges, Khieu Samphan testified as follows, and I quote, "Nguyen Chia and Pol Pot brought me from Udong to Phnom Penh. They brought me to buildings of the railway station. I was at the railway station with Pol Pot, Nguyen Chia and the other persons who frequently visited the place to get instructions from Pol Pot." Unquote. P. Pon described the situation during the CPK leaders' initial weeks in Phnom Penh as follows. Question. Can you describe for us a little bit what Pol Pot, Nguyen Chia, Khieu Samphan, Yang Sari and the other leaders were doing during the period that they were based at the railway station and the Ministry of Commerce? Can you tell us a little bit about what was going on during that time period? Answer. I saw them working at the train station and at the former Ministry of Commerce. They met and had meetings. They met a lot. They met days and nights. Question. Who is it that you saw meeting with military leaders either at the train station or the Ministry of Commerce? Answer. Just now, I just stated that at the main train station, military commanders from each respective battlefield, for example, Ta Mok, Vaughan Vet, Khoi Ton, So Pim battlefields, these people kept coming to work with them on a regular basis, and also their commanders from divisions who came to meet at the train station. Then we relocated to the Ministry of Commerce, and at that location, cadres from each battlefield would come and go. They came to meet then, so they worked on a regular basis. They worked every day and night at the train station and at the Ministry of Commerce. When it was necessary, they had to continue working until late at night. Question. And was Nguyen Chia a regular participant in these meetings? Answer. Indeed. When they met, they came all together to meet. Question. Was Khieu Samphan a regular participant in these meetings? Answer. Yes, he was. These people came to work on a regular basis, including Pol Pot, Nguyen Chia, Khieu Samphan, Yang Sari, Sun Sen, who worked on a daily basis. They worked together there. Unquote. P. Pon also identified which of the CPK leaders lived together at these locations. Quote, question. During this period that the leaders were together in the train station and then the Ministry of Commerce, were they living and working together day and night, or did they have separate places where they were going to sleep at night? Answer. What I saw was that Pol Pot, Nguyen Chia, Khieu Samphan, Yang Sari lived close to one another, except Sun Sen and Tai Mok, Vaughan Vet and Khoi Ton, who lived separately. So Pim also had his own separate place to live. Your Honours, my colleague Chia Liang has already discussed some of the key meetings that were held during this time period and the decisions that were made by the CPK leaders at those meetings, including the 10-day meeting of the Central Committee held at the Silver Pagoda in May 1975. I will talk some more about the significance of that meeting later. Mr. President, later in 1975, the CPK leaders in Phnom Penh moved to their permanent offices and residences known as K1 and K3, where Nguyen Chia, Khieu Samphan, Pol Pot and Yang Sari continued to live and work together on a daily basis for the remainder of the DK regime. Your Honours have heard extensive testimony from the guards and messengers who worked at K1 and K3. Witnesses such as Un Tan, Sa Vi, Saut Tung, Pin Keen and Leng Chung, all of whom confirmed that the accused lived and worked at K1 and K3 with the other members of the party centre. Khieu Samphan himself acknowledged this fact in the following testimony from his interview with the co-investigating judges. Quote, "As for myself, I lived in K3 after I had stayed at K1 for 2 or 3 months, after we moved from the Silver Pagoda in the Royal Palace. In fact, most of the leaders lived in K3, Yang Sari, Sun Sen, Nguyen Chia. As for Pol Pot, once in a while he stayed in K3 because he had to be careful and cautious all the time. It was not uncommon for him to change his house from one place to another. He also lived in K1. The meetings of the Standing Committee were often held at the K1 office, but sometimes at the K3 office, Pol Pot's house, and it could be held in the kitchen." Unquote. Khieu Samphan also described his daily interaction with Pol Pot and Nguyen Chia in the following video-recorded interview.
For living every day, eating, including Pol Pot and Nguyen Chia, we were eating together. Nothing separate.
Your Honours, similarly, it's clear that Nguyen Chia and Khieu Samphan, with other Standing Committee and senior members of the CPK, including Pol Pot, would work and interact closely together for meetings with overseas delegations and, of course, internal party events. You will see in the following videos a series of 6 different events where footage has been recovered from the Democratic Kampuchea period, showing the very close camaraderie and working relationships between Nguyen Chia, Khieu Samphan and other members of the Standing Committee. Your Honours, the first clip will show the Vietnamese Communist Party delegation top leaders arriving at Pochentong Airport, likely on the 2nd of August 1975. You will see party centre members Pol Pot, Nguyen Chia, Von Vet and Khieu Samphan welcoming them very warmly, hugging and kissing them. The Vietnamese delegation had come to discuss border issues. The next clip you will see, Your Honours, shows the Vietnamese top leaders departing from Cambodia around the 10th of August 1975. You'll see there Pol Pot, Nguyen Chia, Yang Sari, Khieu Samphan and Vaughan Vet coming to the airport to bid them farewell, looking very healthy. The next clip, Your Honours, will show the CPK leaders Khieu Samphan, Nguyen Chia, Yang Sari and Vaughan Vet waving at a Lao delegation, or President Suphan Ovong, on his arrival on the 17th of December 1977. And this clip shows Khieu Samphan discussing with the Lao President with Nguyen Chia and Yang Sari at his side. This clip, Your Honours, shows the arrival of a Chinese leader at Pochentong. Party centre members Pol Pot, Nguyen Chia, Yang Sari, Khieu Samphan, Vaughan Vet, Sun Sen and Yang Tarit welcomed him at the airport. The last clip, Your Honours, will show all party centre leaders, including Pol Pot, Nguyen Chia, Yang Sari, Khieu Samphan, Sun Sen and Vaughan Vet, clapping at a mass CPK rally held at or in the Olympic Stadium of Phnom Penh during the regime Your Honours, only one witness in the entire two-year trial sought to dispute that Khieu Samphan lived and worked with Nguyen Chia, Pol Pot and the other party centre leaders on a daily basis. His wife, Sosa Chiat, who claimed that later in the DK period the other leaders moved out of K3. Her testimony is inconsistent with that of every other witness and with the statements of Khieu Samphan himself. They were the words of a loyal wife trying to distance her husband from the other CPK leaders. Her testimony lacked any credibility and must be rejected by this chamber. Your Honours, the close relationship and unbreakable bond between these three men, Pol Pot, Nguyen Chia and Khieu Samphan, is beyond dispute. You just heard the words of Khieu Samphan, "We did nothing separately." The evidence also shows that these three leaders supported and protected one another. When Khieu Samphan was implicated in an S-21 confession in 1978, it was Nguyen Chia who took action to protect him. You have heard the testimony from S-21 Chairman Duch that he was threatened by Nguyen Chia when he learned Khieu Samphan had been implicated and instructed that Brother Hem, who is Khieu Samphan, was never again to be mentioned in an S-21 confession. This incident is also discussed extensively in Tet Sambat's book, when Nguyen Chia admits he had a meeting with Duch in which he was told a confession points to Bang Hem, which is Khieu Samphan, and explains his reaction to that news as follows. And I quote Nguyen Chia, "I felt that if they now accuse Khieu Samphan, that means later they would accuse all the people, and I would be one of those people. If Khieu Samphan betrayed Angkar, then it means everyone is betraying Angkar." Unquote. This is telling you, Your Honours, that Nguyen Chia had both the will and the power to save his loyal brother, Khieu Samphan. At the same time, he allowed thousands of others to be tortured and killed based on the same unreliable S-21 confessions. Your Honours, the bond between Nguyen Chia, Khieu Samphan and Pol Pot continued in the post-January 1979 period. during which time they stayed in the mountains of the Thai border, continuing to work together as the top leadership of the Khmer Rouge until the final days and the very bitter end of their revolutionary movement. In 1997, after other Khmer Rouge leaders had placed Pol Pot under house arrest, Nguyen Chia refused to turn him over to the Cambodian or international authorities for prosecution, stating to the Bangkok Post, I quote, "We have to be moral, we have to protect him from being taken," unquote. In Tet Sambat's book, Nguyen Chia describes how he and Khieu Samphan went on long walks and had secret conversations after Pol Pot's death in 1998, and eventually decided that it was time to leave the Khmer Rouge and surrender to the Cambodian government. When they arrived in Phnom Penh, Nguyen Chia and Khieu Samphan held a press conference together on the 29th of December 1998, where they made clear to the entire world their lack of remorse and disregard for the victims of the Khmer Rouge period. If we can now play that video clip.
Let bygone be bygone is the best solution for our country.
And if we can play the next clip, it's from the same press conference, but taken from a different camera. And this is what Nguyen Chia has to say.
We express deep regret, not only for the life of the population, but also for the lives of animals that have been victims of war. We are really sorry.
Your Honours, given their close relationship, together as members of the inner circle of the Khmer Rouge leadership for 28 years, Khieu Samphan and Nguyen Chia clearly know each other very well. That brings me to another one of the big lies we have heard from the accused during this trial. Despite having worked side by side with Khieu Samphan from 1970 to 1998, virtually every time he was asked a question about Khieu Samphan in this trial, Nguyen Chia claimed to know nothing of the man. On the 14th of December 2011, in this courtroom, Nguyen Chia stated, I quote, "I was not close to Mr. Khieu Samphan. I only knew that he was from France and he was a member of the party," unquote. A few minutes later, Nguyen Chia was asked by Judge Laverne whether he was aware that Khieu Samphan was a member of the Central Committee. His response, quote, "Your Honour, I don't know," unquote. Nguyen Chia was equally evasive when he was questioned by the prosecution about Khieu Samphan. When asked whether Khieu Samphan was the chairman of the State Presidium, Nguyen Chia responded, quote, "Mr. President, I was not related to the administrative affairs. I was concerned with the education," unquote. He claimed that he did not know when Khieu Samphan joined the party and that he knew nothing at all about Khieu Samphan fleeing from Phnom Penh and joining the Marquis in 1967. Nguyen Chia claimed to be unable to tell the chamber that Khieu Samphan's role, what his role was in the funk or grunk. When asked if he knew where Khieu Sampan was located during the period from 1970 to April 1975, he responded, "No, I don't, because it was part of the secret affairs." Nguyen Chia also claimed that he never attended meetings with Khieu Sampan, apparently unaware that Khieu Sampan himself had already admitted to being a regular participant in standing committee meetings when Nguyen Chia attended. Many of these preposterous lies by Nguyen Chia were accompanied by the assertion that he rarely talked to or had contact with Khieu Sampan because he belonged to the, quote, intellectuals group, unquote. Your Honours, we would submit that the explanation for this incredulous testimony of Nguyen Chia is rather simple. Like he did back in 1978, when Khieu Sampan's name appeared in an S21 confession, Nguyen Chia is trying to protect his longtime friend and brothers in arms from prosecution. And he's willing to tell any lie, however far-fetched, to do so. I will return to the issue again later when we talk about the meetings at which the CPK leaders decided to evacuate Phnom Penh, a subject on Nguyen Chia, which Nguyen Chia has admitted his own involvement, but lied about the participation of the co-accused Khieu Sampan. Mr. President, Your Honours, to understand how the CPK, how these accused exercise power, we also must look at the process of decision-making in the Communist Party of Kampuchea to see how the roles and contributions of the accused in these crimes fit. The principles of democratic centralism and collective decision-making are core principles of the Communist Party of Kampuchea, Democratic Kampuchea. It's inevitable in trials like this that the accused at some point will try to point the finger at other persons as the ones who are responsible for the crimes that they're being prosecuted for. It was not me, it was Pol Pot, it was not me, it was the Zone Secretary. Your Honours, the accused here, however, have a major problem in making this argument, because in the Communist Party of Kampuchea, decisions were not made by individuals, they were made collectively by the party centre and leadership committees in which Nguyen Chia and Khieu Sampan participated and played essential roles. This fundamental principle is laid out in black and white in the most important document that governed the members of the Communist Party of Kampuchea, the party statute. Chapter 3 of the party statute is titled Organisational Principles of the Party, and Article 6 provides as follows, I quote, "The Communist Party of Kampuchea takes the principle of democratic centralism as its organisational foundation. That is, all party leadership organisations must implement collective leadership and have specific persons holding responsibility. 2, all the various decisions of the party must be made collectively." Unquote. Article 3A of the party statute recognised the right of every full rights member of the party to, quote, "consider and discuss and join in decision-making on all party affairs, doing this according to the principle of democratic centralism," unquote. Nguyen Chia was asked about the party statute and the principle of collective decision-making at the very start of this trial. His testimony and admissions on this subject matter are of such importance to the core issues of this case, the existence of a common criminal plan agreed by the accused, that I'd like to take your honours through that testimony in detail. In the first part of his testimony that I will read, which is from the 15th of December 2011 in this courtroom, Nguyen Chia was asked to describe in general the principles of democratic centralism and collective decisions. Answer. Nguyen Chia. Quote, Mr. President, the democratic centralism refers to collections of ideas and visions and knowledge from the party members and also the central party, and this democratic centralism was practiced broadly or generally. That applied also to the party branches in the villages and the communes. They also practiced this democratic centralism, that is to gather all the ideas of the party members, and if there was wrong ideas, the party members at the district levels might correct or might add to that ideas. Question. I would also like you to refer to Article 6.2, which provides all of the various decisions of the party must be made collectively. Was the principle of collective decisions part of the principle of democratic centralism? Answer. Nguyen Chia. Mr. President, Article 2, all of the various decisions of the party must be made collectively. That means all decisions of the party must be made collectively and not individually. Question. Was the principle of collective decisions and democratic centralism part of the party statute that was adopted at the first Party Congress in 1960? Answer. Mr. President, the democratic centralism was part of the collective leadership, and the collective leadership was also part of democratic centralism. The principle was adopted and implemented in every meeting of the party's Congress. The party held on to that principle firmly. Question. So this was a principle that was in effect the entire time that you were Deputy Secretary of the party. Is that correct? Answer. Mr. President, that is correct. Unquote. Nguyen Chia was then asked to confirm whether the principle of collective decisions was followed at meetings of the Communist Party of Kampuchea Standing and Central Committee. I quote, question, was the principle of collective decisions followed at the meeting of the Standing and Central Committee that you attended? Answer, yes, Your Honours, it was implemented. Question, and could you describe or explain to the Chamber the process by which party organisations, such as the Standing or Central Committee, made collective decisions? Answer, Your Honour, collectivity means everybody would participate in a meeting to express the ideas. Every meeting adhered to this principle, and not only at the Central Committee or Standing Committees levels. And then the Secretary of the Party would consolidate all those ideas and opinions, and if members of the party are not satisfied, then all together would be able to express their objections or opposal until they reach a unanimous agreement. Then it would become official. Otherwise, if there is no complete agreement, discussion needs to continue. Question, this practice that you have described of reaching collective decisions This was a practice that was followed by the Standing and Central Committee during the time that you were Deputy Secretary of the party. Is that correct? Answer. Not only during the time that I was Deputy Secretary, it was at every stage, at all times. It was implemented generally. It was a universal principle of the party. It was implemented from the party's branch up to the Central Committee, unquote. Your Honours, while there are some individuals and some authors of books who have questioned whether the party leadership followed the practice of collective decisions, they were not informed by the detail and clear testimony that you heard from the Deputy Party Secretary of the Communist Party of Kampuchea. In one of his moments of candour at trial, Nguyen Chia could not have been any more clear. Decisions made collectively and not individually, a universal principle that the party held onto firmly and implemented at every level. A principle that required discussion to continue until there was unanimous agreement. The very essence of a joint criminal enterprise. While Nguyen Chia's lawyers still attempt to quibble with this point in paragraph 189 of their final written submission, arguing that it would not have been possible all the time for discussions to, I quote, carry on ad infinitum until all present were in agreement, unquote. They do not dispute that the requirement of collective decisions was a core principle of the CPK. No matter how skilled or clever their lawyering may be, even they cannot avoid the unequivocal admissions that their client has made in the courtroom. Your Honours, Khieu Samphan has also acknowledged the requirement of collective and unanimous decisions by the CPK leadership bodies. In an interview which he discussed the evacuation of cities, Khieu Samphan stated that, and I quote, "If there had been a single voice against the evacuations, there could have been no evacuations," unquote. And, Your Honours, we have some video of that statement by Khieu Samphan, which we would like to now show.
But the evacuation of people led through many problems. It caused many deaths. And it also affected the cadres' relatives, which led to the conflict. Members of the Standing Committee who agreed to the evacuation of people also felt hesitated about their decision. At that time, if there was a voice to object to the evacuation, then the evacuation would never take place. The agreement of evacuation was to consider about people who died due to food shortage, so we agreed to evacuate the people. And after the evacuation, we established the cooperatives. And for high-level cooperatives,
Mr. President, this may be an appropriate time for me to break, so I would ask if that was possible.
President, thank you. The time is appropriate for a short break. We will take a short break and return at 5 to 3. Thank you.
សូមអញ្ជើញក្រោកឈរ